Good morning, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. How are you too? No, I want that. Good morning, class. Anyway, my name is Carrie Eben, and I'm very happy to be here. Come on in, everyone. There's seats right here in the front. Alrighty. If you want to move your seats over to the side, it's totally fine too. I understand.
Yeah, I want to.
Come on in. My name is Carrie Eben, and I'm from Siloam Springs, Arkansas, and I helped found a school called Sager Classical Academy. And I realize I don't have my name tag on. That's okay. Here's some, you want to pass these out? Come on in. Everybody's a little enjoying their breakfasts, I guess. I'm excited to present to you today about the 5 common topics. I learned about this 2 different places. I have been in classical education for over 20 years in all the ways that one could be involved in classical education. So I started out at a classical school over 20 years ago when it was completely new in Tulsa at Augustine Classical Academy. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that school, and we were meeting in a mall, I think, at the very beginning. And then I had children and was teaching, and then I ended up teaching and homeschooling with classical conversations for, well, I'm on my 12th and last year, so I'm graduating my baby girl who is a senior this year, and I have a son that's in college. I was introduced to the 5 common topics first that way through classical conversations, because we use the 5 common topics when we discuss really what I learned. We have kind of a Harkness discussion, although that's not what I didn't know that's what it was called. I was like, that's what this is. So, and then I'm in my last year this year as part of a Circe apprenticeship group, the Circe Institute, if you're familiar with that. And we use the 5 common topics to teach writing. And really, we use the 5 common topics as part of invention. So the 5 common topics are really the first part of the 5 canons of rhetoric. The 5 canons of rhetoric being invention, arrangement, elocution, memory, and delivery. I'll say that again because I don't even have that on there. So it's the 5 canons of rhetoric, and it's invention, arrangement. I'll put it up here. Invention, arrangement, elocution, memory, and delivery. So in the ancient times, the rhetoricians would use this form in order to write and give speeches. So what we're going to be working on today is here, invention. So it is really just gathering and wondering. There are no wrong answers. So the 5 common topics that we use here in invention, and they're listed on your sheet, and we're going to be referring to them all throughout this session. They are going to help us gather ideas and wonder about things. And it's okay to not have the same answer in this stage in the game as somebody else. That's okay. It's just thinking about ideas and expounding on them. So we're going to be talking about each of these. I lost my clicker. There it is. We're going to do this in 2 different sessions. So we're going to use the 5 common topics to talk about a poem. One of my favorite poems that's about Easter. And then Then we're going to talk about math. You can use the 5 common topics about math too. And probably you can use the 5 common topics for any subject and really any level of student. So this, probably the material here is probably for middle school, I would say. But if you're in elementary school, because I know some of you are, it's totally fine because you can use these tools to have a conversation at any level, any grade level, and really in any subject. So I could put a Latin sentence on the board or a grammar sentence on the board, or we could read history, we could read literature, and we can pull these tools out of our toolbox and we can use them. We can talk to our own children. If you have children, you can talk about things in the car and pull these out. I like teachers to have even just the little 5 common topics, on their board, a little chart somewhere, so that students are remembering, in discussion that they can bring these out. And it also reminds you as a teacher to do that too. That's probably something I should do one day. I should have little cards that I just hand out, like a little business card or a bookmark, and just hand them out. I'm going to do that next time, so that you can have it in your wallet and you can pull it out and you remind yourself. You can also, these tools are great for any conversation at the dinner table. If you are leading a Bible study, I do this with Bible stories all the time. I love to talk about Mark 6 with Jesus in the boat, in the water, and really pulling out all the different things with the 5 common topics to talk about that usually people, they're like, I never thought about that before. And honestly, every time I have the discussion, I think about something new every time. So that's the great thing about these 5 common topics of invention. They help us think and invent things that are new. And they help us to think deeply and well. And they're just very easy to always have, at your disposal. There's 5, so there's 1 for each finger on your hand, and they're very easy to memorize, I think. So I hope, really, after the end of this, you could probably go home and have this memorized. Definition, comparison, circumstance, relationship, and testimony. So those are the 5 common topics. And in the canons of rhetoric, they would go right underneath invention. We would use these tools to try to think about what we're going to say. So if you're helping a student write an essay, go through all these things, exhaust the topic. Sometimes students don't like to, they're lazy thinkers. They don't like to think, so they may give you pushback, but it's part of the way that we think well. So let's look first at our poem, and this is Easter Wings by George Herbert, 1633. He was a man who loved to write poetry, religious poetry. Has anybody heard of George Herbert? Okay, has anybody read any of his poetry? Awesome. Has anybody never heard of George Herbert and you've never read his poetry? Raise your hand. Awesome. I'm so glad. I hate to talk to people who know, because it's not like I'm a George Herbert scholar and I know a lot about him, but I'm learning to love him. When I first engaged with this poem the first time, it was hard. Okay, so some of you may look at this poem that we are going to kind of unpack today and go, I do not get it. That's okay. That's okay, because really the more you read it, the more we talk about it, the more you're going to become familiar with it, and the 5 common topics are going to help with that. So let me read it. We're going to read it a couple of times together. I always like to do that. So, because it just takes a while for our brain to orient to his style of writing. He is writing in the 17th century, and you'll notice some different things about the language. And your students will notice different things about his language as well, too. Easter Wings by George Herbert. Lord, who createst man in wealth and store, though foolishly he lost the same, decaying more and more, till he became most poor with thee. Oh, let me rise as larks harmoniously, and sing this day thy victories. Then shall the fall further the flight in me. My tender age in sorrow did begin, and still with sickness and shame thou didst so punish sin, that I became most thin with thee. Let me combine and feel this day thy victory, for if I imp my wing on thine, affliction shall advance the flight in me. I'm going to read it one more time. Lord, who createst man in wealth and store, though foolishly he lost the same, decaying more and more, till he became most poor with thee. Oh, let me rise as larks harmoniously, and sing this day thy victories. Then shall the fall further the flight in me. My tender age and sorrow did begin, and still with sickness and shame thou didst so punish sin, that I became most thin with thee. Let me combine and feel this day thy victory, for if I imp my wing on thine, affliction shall advance the flight in me. Okay, so let's look at some of our common topics. Okay, I'm sure some of you have lots of things in your mind going on from various places, but let's start with testimony. So I'm going to go backwards. By the way, you don't have to use the common topics in order. There is no order. And you know what? You don't have to use all the common topics. If there's one that you don't really want to talk about or doesn't fit or you don't have time for, it's okay. They're literally, you use them as you see fit. You don't serve the 5 common topics. They serve you. Okay? So there's no rules. It's just to get invention. It's very to get the creative juices going. So let's just look here. I mean, testimony is kind of about authority, and also like who is there. If it's something in literature or history, who is there in the poem? A testimony looks a little bit different in math about authority. We might talk about laws and things like that, but for a poem or literature, we look at, who is in the story and who is the authority in the story, and maybe look at inside the story and then outside the story. So we do have a little story going on here in testimony. Who is in this poem? What are they saying? To whom are they speaking, and what do... Oh, I just corrected this just a minute ago, and I realized that forgot... about, so sorry. What do others say about this? So let's hear what you have to say. And I'm going to sit down, and we'll just have a discussion. So who is in this poem?
First word says the Lord.
Okay, so is the Lord speaking?
No, he's the one being addressed.
So the Lord is being addressed. Who else is speaking?
George Herbert.
Okay, so yeah, we can assume it could be George Herbert. He's in the poem. What are they saying? What's he saying? Or what? Well, let's start with the Lord. I'm going to look at the Lord, and this is something you can do in a story or a poem. If there's a subject, what are they doing? What's then the action? So what is, when he is talking about the Lord, what is he saying that the Lord is doing? And you can write all over your paper and circle things. Feel free. What does the Lord say the Lord is doing?
He created man.
So he createst, right? What happened to man then? Right. What word does he use to show that?
Decay.
Decaying. So the man was decaying. What else happened to the man or mankind?
He's become poor.
He's become poor.
He became thin. Sorry.
Yeah, he became thin. He became thin. You like that? This shrinking. Who is that man that he's talking about? Do you think?
He's talking about himself.
He could be
wasted
talking about
away from
himself.
tuberculosis.
Okay.
He died young.
You probably know way more about George Herbert. You want to Give us a little background.
I don't know a ton,
Okay.
but I think he might have been talking about himself having this disease almost all of his life and gradually becoming weaker and weaker and wasting away until he died in his late 20s or early 30s.
Right.
And he saw this as a metaphor for all mankind.
That's good. That's good. And I was thinking, as mankind, he's talking about himself.
Right.
He's talking about the Lord. He's also talking about man as a whole.
Wasting away from the disease of sin.
Yes. Maybe Adam. Maybe
Yeah.
he's talking about the fall. The fall. He could be. So then it goes down to at the end of that stanza. It goes back to who's now talking. He's now talking about himself, right? So what is he now doing? Rise. What else? Sing. So those are the actions that he's doing. What about the second stanza? What is he doing?
Recalling how you got that way.
Okay. He's recalling. I like that. That's a harder one too, because for younger kids they may not see that. That you have to infer a lot. Could we have this discussion, by the way, with second graders?
Yes.
I think so. You're gonna have different answers. What do you think they're gonna notice?
Misspellings.
Why are these misspelled? And you go there because you can take it there. You can have a 5 common topics discussion with that, but they can figure out who's in the story and what did they do.
They'll notice the shape of the poem.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
They'll turn it sideways.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Like this.
And we'll get there. Put a pin in that. What were you gonna say?
Well, non-second graders, the boys would be like, diddy-da.
And you could talk about death because this poem has a lot of death imagery in it, and so you could talk about that. Are they going to get all of it? No, but you can certainly have a discussion. So I just wanted to make that clear that we can go there with little people. So we said he's diminishing. What else in the second stanza is he doing? We said he's recalling, which got us on a sidetrack if that's a little abstract, right? So I appreciate that you guys brought that in because not every second graders may not catch that. So what else did he do?
He's still decaying.
He's still decaying. Okay. What else?
We mentioned the thinness earlier, but if I'm reading this correctly, it says, "Thou didst so punish sin that I became most thin." Is that his thinness is actually a result of the Lord's discipline and not from his? Well, it's a result of his sin nature because he had to be disciplined because of that, and so that's an interesting thing. Is this thinness imagery from the Lord's discipline?
Right. That's
It's also the relationship got thin
the relationship got thin.
because of this.
Ooh, put a pin in that. Write that down because we're coming back to relationship in a minute. Okay. And then at the end, what do you notice he's doing? What does he do? He's advancing. Right. Okay, good. So another thing that you could bring into this is what do others say about this, these ideas? What do others say about these ideas? I mean, this is a religious poem, so we could always go to the Bible. What does this bring to mind for you biblically? Any verses come to mind?
I don't know the exact verse number. I'm not don't have memorized, but consider it great joy when you go through sorrows.
Okay, very good.
That's James chapter 1.
Go to him. He knows.
That's
I love that.
The last lines of each stanza. That's what I get from that.
What else?
And it's very David-like, like
Okay.
the kind of
Ooh.
falls and then rising back and kind of putting his
The
faith back in.
descending and ascending.
That
We
sounds
get a
like a
lot
psalm.
of that in Psalms, a descending and an ascending. I'm in the depths of despair, but you are my God. I'm in the depths of despair, and you're my God, and I worship you. So I love that comparison.
Discipline, it's not fun while it happens, but it produces righteousness. So he said, affliction shall advance the flight in me.
Affliction shall advance the flight. Okay, good. Yes?
this kind of Romans 3 thing, where you have the law, and compared to the law, we see that, no one's righteous, no, not one, etc. And so this honing in, when reflection is on himself, it hones into this tiny nothingness, right? Because what does the law show? Everything stops worthless, not, and then of course with Christ.
Yeah.
Fullness, right?
I love that. I thought of Romans also. I was thinking of Romans 5:8 for while we were sinners. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. That's something that came to my mind. Also, what came to my mind is Isaiah 40:31 about rising.
Yeah.
Were you thinking of that one too? Because of the bird imagery. Okay, we've had lots of. Go ahead. Yes.
I just thought it was interesting when I saw the word, because I'm familiar when I think of imp, kind of the more the mischievous, whatever. I'm like, obviously that can't be what that means. So I looked it up, and it says the verb is to repair a damaged feather in the wing or tail feather of a trained hawk, for example, by attaching part of a new feather. So to me, when I read that, I imagine like how he hides us in the cleft, because it's like I'm imping my wing, like my broken wing, but I'm hiding myself in you, and that's what's going to help me.
So, well, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think that I looked at that too, and that idea of dying to yourself because you're truly living with, because it's the sentence is with thee, oh let me rise, with thee let me combine, and so like the idea of it, that dying to yourself, that the injuring of your own wing, affliction of yourself, dying to yourself actually advances the flight because you're with Christ.
Well, so both of you are diving right in to different areas of our 5 common topics. So, Holly, you brought up a definition issue, right? What is imp? Because my next question, I could go to my 5 common topics, and definition, is one of them. I might ask, are there any words that you might not understand? Okay, so we might ask, what is it? What is imp? So asking your students, is there any words that don't make sense to you or you're having trouble with? Because all of you already asked those questions yourselves. What is it? What is it not? So Holly brought up, what is an imp? Is it a little fairy-like creature that runs around making mischief? No, that's not what an imp is in this situation. An imp is, would you say that again, Holly? It's
It's to repair, the verb is to repair a damaged feather in the wing or tail feather of a trained hawk by attaching part of a new feather.
right. It's the grafting and combining. And so, what's another? What would be? And then so another question that I might have there. So I was anticipating an order that we were going through. What you're going to figure out is your actual conversations about things are not predictable. And so you're just going to go with the flow, right? So I'm finding a relationship. Okay, so you brought up, what's your name?
Oh, Becky.
Becky, you brought up the relationship between imping or grafting, and, huh? Oh, sorry, I was talking to Becky. So, Becky back there.
Okay.
Sorry. But both of you brought up relationships, but I want to hear yours too. But I'm going right into yours. You had a relationship between the idea of grafting and what? Would you say that again? What you had said before?
Just that dying to yourself and being in Christ, this idea of that's when, because according to the poem, it's with thee, O let me rise, with thee, let me combine.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you have, they both end with further the flight and me, advance the flight and me. It's in Christ is where you rise.
Right. So if we look at the relationship of imp, like what happens before when we imp and we needing an imp in the situation of a bird? What's happening before? Something is damaged. Yeah, something gets damaged. And then what's the effect? So the cause of having to imp is to have damage. The effect is then you need to repair it. And how does he repair it? He repairs it with with Christ by grafting and combining with Christ. So we see that relationship.
And I do like this.
Yeah, so tell us what you were, because I said put a pin in it, and now I can't even remember what it was. So that's why I said you remember.
So, and when you talk about getting thin, the relationship between, because of sin, the relationship between George and the man is diminishing.
Right.
It's going down, like the volume of your poem is going down.
Yeah. Oh, so what is the relationship between the words in the poem and what's being the arrangement of the poem? Go back to 5 common topics, actually. The arrangement, how's the arrangement of the poem being affected by the words? So you're saying there's a relationship there.
Right, I mean, as you read it, you decrease the volume.
I did,
and
yes.
then the words narrow down just like you're getting thin. So there's like this, I don't know what you call it, but it's related, the two things.
Yeah, there's
like
a
reinforcement.
correlation between the words and the ideas, and then there was a correlation between how I actually recited the poem,
Right.
and the words and ideas. So very good.
Actually, if you
Yeah.
look at this, physically look at it, it looks like an hourglass.
Right.
It does.
Similar to that Romans 3 that
Oh,
he was
dang
talking
it, I
about.
thought that was an original thought.
Well, and there is a relationship between the words and how it looks this way as well, right? As you were saying, if you turn it on its side, what does it look like? Yeah, so he's talking about wings. He's talking about flying. He's talking about birds and going up and up. And he has made his poem in, his words fit this image. Basically. Isn't that, I mean, very, very intentional with every single word and every single thought.
Was it originally written in English or?
I did have a question
Yeah.
about the English.
Mhm.
Our job obviously is to introduce them and to make them question the spelling and those kind of things. What would happen if when you presented it, the way that they would know it and then show them this, or vice versa? Or
I
would you
would-
suggest not doing that?
I would absolutely keep it as is.
Okay.
Yeah. And because you can have a great discussion
Right.
about spelling. And actually spelling wasn't it wasn't universally accepted. We didn't have universally accepted spelling rules until I think the 1800s,
Okay.
early 1800s. And so you can have a discussion actually about the history of education and spelling. What a great conversation, and how we now kind of have a protocol and rules of how to spell, but
Which
back
is
then
what
we
they're
did not.
learning.
Which
That's
is
why I was
what they are
asking.
learning.
Hmm.
But that's a really good, and you might have it, I'm not sure where that would fall about, that's just part of noticing and gazing about differences. And, creatist, we don't say that anymore. It's created, but it's another way of saying created in an older English form. So having those discussions about history. I mean, looking at the picture of George Herbert and the way he was dressing. I mean, obviously this is an older poem with an enduring idea about God, about Christ. So we're
Excuse
skipping
me.
around everywhere. Yeah, go ahead.
George Herbert was a contemporary of King James. Was a rector in the chapel at the time that the King James Bible was being written. So his spelling and his grammar rules even predate the Pilgrims coming over to the Americas. This language is that old, but it was definitely written in the English of the day.
It's beautiful.
Well, and you can relate that by just opening up a KJV
Exactly.
Bible and
Yeah, an old KJV.
making that and compare. So let's go back. Let's go to compare. Segue. We're having a great conversation. Thank you all. This is great. And I'm gonna have to cut it short so we go to math. But comparing what is alike, what is different, what words or images can we compare? What are some words and images that you find in this poem? Let's start even just with the shape. We're talking about the shape of the poem, the top and the bottom. What do you notice about each stanza? Comparing the top imagery to the bottom imagery in each stanza. By the way, what's a stanza? Let's define that. What's a stanza?
Like a paragraph in a poem.
Right, it's like a paragraph in a poem. It's a section, and you can see these sections very easily, right? One wing, two wing. So in the first wing, let's compare the beginning and the end. What's going on in the beginning of the stanza, and then in the middle of the stanza, and then at the ending of the stanza?
You mean like the shape of it, or?
And the ideas in those shapes.
Okay.
I think agency is a key to it because, and we were kind of discussing this a little bit because at the beginning of both stanzas, it's the agency of George and mankind and the fall and the sorrow, and then it becomes there's this little with thee as we were talking about, and so then it starts to become about what God is doing and specifically God's victories, and then I would say the agency actually makes a third turn because it ends with then shall the fall further the flight in me, and then affliction shall advance the flight in me, and so it's the result of God's victory and activity in the man. So it's man, God, both.
Mm-hmm.
I think it
I
needs
was
Ooh, I like
feeling,
that.
and I'm actually visually picturing like death, dying, loss of breath, just kind of this exhale, and then God breathes life in and hope, and it's like this expanding again.
Well, and if you
And it starts with thee.
with thee, I know, right in the middle, right where you just want to fold the paper. If you even think about the sounds, Lord, who createst man in wealth and store, though foolishly he lost the same, decaying more and more, till he became most poor. What is even the sound of the words? The phonics is heavy, yeah. And then, oh, let me rise as larks harmoniously, and sing this day thy victories, then shall the fall further the flight in me. You have a lifting, you have a brightness to the sound of the words as well too, and you have some lovely alliterations here. Don't you see that? And you also have a lot of assonance as well. The more, poor, store, in that rhyme scheme, you have an assonance, which is the middle of the word that makes us kind of go down. And then shall the fall further the flight in me. It's all right here at your lips with those alliterations. So good. That's a good comparison.
It sounds fluttery. Like
It
wings
does
flying.
sound fluttery, doesn't it? And affliction shall advance the flight in me. Some other things I wanted to compare. I was wondering, I don't have an answer to this question, but why did he use fall in the first stanza at the end, then shall the fall further the flight in me? Why did he use further? Then shall the fall further the flight in me, and then he uses affliction shall advance the flight in me. I realized he was making maybe a literary device move there.
Right.
But is there a difference between further and advance? I wonder. I just wanted to be very. I just thought, why didn't
One
he use
sound's
the
going
same?
away, the other sound is drawn near.
Further?
Maybe.
Further's like continuing, but advance is like almost like assertion. Like there's
So an
more
advance, there's
power,
kind of a
more authority,
motivation
right?
behind that, like
There's some power in
you're
it.
deciding to advance. Further just sounds more
Continuing.
passive. Okay, I like that. I'm gonna, cause I thought, well, it's just the alliteration. He's just changing the word. But I thought, well, words matter. So why would further? Maybe there's something more to that.
That AD in front of advance is two or twos.
Okay, that's right. In Latin, yes. Good Latin integration right there.
Good.
Your students. Okay, the last thing we're going to look at, if I can find it, circumstancing, like when did this happen? What else was going on at the same time? What is happening now? Why does this matter? This is a little hard to understand with a poem, but what is happening in the poem right then? What's going on in the poem? We've talked about it kind of already.
Like you're talking about like the rise and fall of him personally.
Yeah, he's going on an inner struggle.
Right,
Right.
yes. And when I guess, he was talking about how like it was his physical with his sickness and stuff. Whereas I seen it more of like a spiritual struggle.
It's a spiritual struggle, and it could very well be a
That
physical.
was I liked that. I mean, I didn't know that, but
Yeah.
you can when you think of it in that light, you can definitely see that also.
Right. So that would be. So we think about this. I think about this in little concentric circles for circumstance. What's going on right here, and then what's going on here, and what's going on here. So what's going on here in the poem is an inner struggle. What's going on maybe in the next line maybe is the physical struggle. And then I'm gonna lean on Dan to tell us more about the history of maybe what's going on even outside of this time
Right.
period.
National or something.
Yeah, you can even.
Yeah. So,
Say King James. You mentioned King James.
Yeah.
He was during the King James era, and what else is going on?
right, and so in a much larger context of at least the history of the church, if not humanity, this is after the Reformation, the Counter-Reformation, Bible's starting to be translated into common languages. A huge fight over that.
Right.
Is this evil? People were burned at the stake for doing things like
For
this.
even translating the Bible into English,
Correct.
right?
Wasn't that the
Correct,
time
and
of
yet
It was Time of Tyndale, yeah.
it brought about it brought about a huge revival.
Mm-hmm.
The Holy Spirit moved, and people were drawn to Christ in ways that hadn't happened in centuries.
And then on the opposite end of that, it was the advent of the Enlightenment,
Yes.
and so then you had a lot of thinking going on with Descartes, and then 100 years later, Locke. So there's a lot of struggle going on during this time. So this would segue into a wonderful discussion of history,
Yeah.
you know, with students of what's going on. Let's see. Oh, why does this matter? So let's think about you. Why does this matter to you? Why should you care about this?
I think it was a beautiful way of putting that into words, the spiritual struggle. Like, you know, even in my own life, like when I read this and I started paying attention, you know, it brought to mind a spiritual struggle that I went through. And so just comparing that struggle and just the points that he makes and the way he feels and stuff, definitely relatable
To
Yeah.
your own
Right,
personal
right.
struggle, that we all feel this,
and the thinning down and the
and then
yes, and then you get through it and you rise and you sing and you feel victorious, and
so we can connect to Herbert in this way, because it's a human thing to struggle with this feeling.
Yeah, one of the things that really stuck out to me in the second, so he's saying all these facts, which kind of made, when you were talking about the line, made me think about it. But he's saying all these facts of like salvation in the first one, but then in the second one, he's like, you know, let me come by and feel this day thy victory. Like sometimes we just don't feel it. We
Right.
don't feel like that we're, you know,
Yeah.
that everything Christ says about us, that we're seated in the heavenlies, and all of these things that are true, because he said it,
Right.
but we don't always feel it. And so I like that he was like, this is all true, and now let me feel this day thy victory.
Right. So yeah, we feel his pain of just struggling with the reality of the day to day, the reality of living in our bodies that don't feel good and don't cooperate with us, and our mental state for the day, the things that are getting through us. But then he goes to the truth. So this is the title of this poem is Easter Wings, and so it's really about, you know, I mean, it's a great poem to think about during Lent right now, because right now we're remembering our death and our humanity, and we're looking forward to the flying, to the ascending up high with Christ. Yeah. So I hope this poem will be something that you can pull out of your pocket during this Lenten season. Maybe you'll do this with your students, depending on the age, and you'll you know, if you're trying this with a second grade class or a fourth, or you know, you're going to have way different answers. But some things may surprise you about what they pick out. So, so now we're going to switch. We had this great discussion. I kind of just want to end there, but I feel like I part of this is to discuss anything. So we are going to discuss anything. We're going to go to math, and I'm going to go to algebra. And the reason why I'm going to go to algebra is because I am not comfortable with algebra. Okay, I am not an algebra teacher, but I will tell you that the 5 common topics have helped me teach algebra to students when I didn't feel comfortable, like my own daughter, because I can ask questions. I can ask stupid questions, okay? Not that these are stupid, but I feel like I'm asking the obvious. And it helps me to it helps myself to slow down and to think through what's going on. It also helps students to slow down and think about what's going on. This next problem about math, we have an equation here, okay? And I actually gave this to some students, and some of them, it was a mixed class of students. Some were advanced math, some were in algebra, it's about right. Some were pre-algebra, not even in pre-algebra yet. It was just, so we had this problem. It was through various levels. Everyone engaged exactly where they were, whether or not they felt comfortable with this or they thought that they knew it. So I had one group, you know, the advanced group, they just wrote it all out. Oh, it's done, you know. And they got up to the board, okay, show me how to do it. So I would just ask them questions. And, you know, they got through and it was wrong. Their answer was wrong. And they didn't know why. And they were like, okay, well, you do this. And they thought they knew. You do this to this and you do this to this. I was like, okay, what is this to this and this to this? I was like, that was my high school or junior high experience with algebra. You do these things, but I don't know why. You do this thing to this over here. You do this thing to this over here. And I didn't actually know why. So we slowed down. We went to the 5 common topics and we asked some questions about why we're doing what we're doing. And, you know, what authority are we appealing to? What do we know about this? So so think about this. Some of you may not have encountered a problem like this. It's been a long time. And some of you thought you never wanted to encounter a problem like this ever again. But we can do it because we have the 5 common topics and they're going to help us through. So let's start with definition. And these are going to go in order very specifically. Let's just look at what this is. Okay? First of all, let's just say this problem out loud because notice on your sheet, I have it actually worked out in words. And usually we start the other way. We start as a word problem and then we write it this way. And so there's a lot of things to do that, but for time and we're not going to do that. So does anybody want to read what this actually says in words from their paper? Can somebody read that for me? Go for it.
Twice the number is increased by 9, and the sum is multiplied by 4. The result is 8 less than 10 times the number. What is the number?
Okay. So let's define what's going on here. And reading it out loud helps us see some things. What is it? Somebody said, yeah. Does it?
Oh.
Okay, good. So let's look at what some of the symbols mean. What do the parentheses mean?
Do me first.
What?
Do me first.
Oh, so the order of operations. How do we know that? What law is that? PEMDAS. And who knows about PEMDAS? Tell me about PEMDAS. Yeah.
Okay, so PEMDAS, or it's actually starting to become GEMDAS, I've discovered.
Okay.
Some people kind of because group it. The idea that things that work together or tend to group things. So parentheses, brackets, fraction bars, radicals, square roots, we call them. Potentially. All tend to group things, so you need to do what's inside of those first before you try to operate anything else. And then you work downward through exponents, multiplication, division from left to right, addition and subtraction from left to right.
Right. So do you know any of the history of PEMDAS? Like, why is that? you told us what it is.
Right. I know
Well,
what
we're
this
gonna ask we're gonna skip to a little bit of an authority question. Who came up with PEMDAS? Because I thought it was, at one time, it was a little bit, it was different, and then everyone decided it's gonna be this way.
is. I don't know the history of the specific derivation of it now.
Well, so somebody, a math god somewhere, said this is the order that it's going to be. That was decided, right? So that's why we do that first. But it also because there's an order to it. But and this is usually where most students get caught. I think it's where I would get caught. I'm glad I have a math because you're going to check the math. I know you're the math person. So that's good. And I'm not, but this isn't about the right answer. The right answers are important, but we are going to ask the questions so we know how we might get the right answer. So we have order operation. What is the equal? Because we read this out loud. Twice the number is increased by 9, and this sum is multiplied by 4. The result is 8 less than 10 times the number. What is the number? What do these numbers mean? I mean, this is like kind of a easy question, right? But it's okay to go to the easy questions because you're going to have students that
What I explain to my
Don't get it.
students is the equal sign is it's like a balance beam.
Yeah.
Think of a balance beam or a seesaw. You won't have to have it equal on both sides. So if you change something on one side, you have to change the exact same thing on the other side.
Right. Well, and what words did we use? It's on your paper. What word do we use for this equal sign? The result is. So this is a result to this. That's actually a cause and effect question, right? That we can go back. That's why it's so hard to keep these all in order. If you're doing these questions in together as a group, it's not like you're going to have, let's start with definition. I mean, you can do that, but what you really want to do is just have it free flowing. So excuse that we're going to be crossing over into all the other common topics right now. That's actually what you want to have happen. But that's a relationship question too, right? So we talked about order of operation. Increased, decreased. If you notice this is where kids get caught too, where I would get caught. The result is 8 less than 10 times the number. 8 less than 10 times the number. What will some of your students want to rate this as? 8 minus 10. The result is 8 less than 10. And what kind of conversation could you have about that?
You have to get them to notice that it's 8 less than 10 times the number. So that less than 8 is the one that's is less than the 10.
Right. So we have to arrange our problem better. So bless you.
Thank you.
And then we want to look at what kind of an expression is this? It's algebraic. What does that mean? What's an algebraic expression have? What? Variables. So what's a variable? It's an unknown number. And then what's a constant number? Stays the same. We know what it is. So we have variables. Do we have variables in here? What are they? N. So you're going to have some students that maybe just having a conversation about this, having a conversation in math is important. Listening to it with words, not just showing them how to do it or doing a skill, but having the conversation and talking it out with words and asking the questions is important. So I had students who were not in pre-algebra yet. They were able to track because they knew enough to be able. It was scaffolding to just get to the next level. With somebody who doesn't teach math all the time, just by asking questions, we made it through. So, I didn't know it went that way. Okay, so let's look at the comparison. Let's look at numeric versus algebraic expressions. We could talk about that, which is what is the difference between a numeric and an algebraic expression? Yeah, so an algebraic expression, which this has numbers and variables. It has an unknown. We can look at products of signed numbers versus non-signed. So, like, I would say, what do I mean by that? So signed numbers versus non-signed numbers.
Products of positives versus
That's
negatives.
what I think I mean. Integers. So, like, if we have an integer, a negative number, or a positive, how do you treat that? How do you treat that? If you're doing negative 8 times 8 versus 8 times 8, or negative 8 times 8. So looking at the differences of going back and see. So what else are you doing when you're asking these questions? Even simple questions like how do you multiply and divide integers? What are you doing? What are you figuring out with your class? Yeah. Maybe there's some holes. Maybe there's some simple things that they didn't get. And you, if you were asking those questions and assessing them and noting that, you would have probably saved a student like me. So
That's what I was just fixing to say. I'm 65 years old. You might as well have put, Greek up there or Spanish or something else. But here's my thought. What you're doing is you're taking these numbers, which are very confusing to a person like me. I'm a word girl, and you're putting that in words that I would not have even thought to ask. Please do that for your word people. I'm not kidding.
Well, and it's good for everyone. It's good for everyone.
It is terrifying. And you're like, what? Says nothing about an integer. And what's an integer?
Yeah, what's an integer?
I don't know.
Somebody want to define what is an integer?
Thank you.
An integer is a number that is without a fractional or decimal part. So a number you count with would be an integer, for example, or a negative number without even a fractional part. So 2, 7, 12, negative 33. Contrast that with 2.5.
Zeros all the way.
Yeah, and it's a number. I think of it as the number on the number line. From 0 back to forward. So.
Well, thank you for this.
Yeah.
Honestly, as teachers, please know there are, and here's another thing, please, when somebody comes to you with this and they're asking you, don't say, what don't you understand?
Because they probably don't know.
They have no idea how to tell you.
How many times are like, you don't know what you don't know?
Exactly right.
So just asking these questions. And again, we haven't used, there's an art to this, I would think. And you have to be in real time with people. Every time you have this conversation with students, it's going to look differently based on who your students are and where they are. And so you're really just kind of reaching into their soul a little bit, peeking in to find out what they know, what they don't know by asking questions. And there's not like a list or order to these questions. You're just thinking about what kinds of comparison questions can I ask, and you're not going to be wrong in how you ask that. You're not going to be wrong in how because it's inventive. It's an inventive process, and you're really just kind of you're drawing out your students. You're leading them out. Circumstance. When would you need to solve a problem like this? When do you isolate a variable and why? Right? When do you use the distributive property? So in what circumstance? And that actually may come to, that'll come to testimony in just a minute. Relationship. What is the relationship between the equation on the right and or I guess this is the whole equation, but the numbers on the right and expressions, thank you. That's the right word. I will change my slide. The expressions on the left and the right. What's the relationship between them? We talked a little bit about the equal sign. So what is the relationship between the numbers and the variables? Okay. What is the relationship between the integers? So just asking, that seems very, very simple. But if you're asking the questions, you're going to figure out that maybe there is something not super simple that your student may not know. So let's look at testimony. What math laws do you need to know? You need to know the distributive law. What's the distributive law say? What do you do with the distributive law?
You distribute the number in front of the parentheses across everything inside the parentheses. So you would multiply the 4 by the 2n and by the 9.
Right, so 4 times 2n plus 4 times 9. So you distribute the 4 among the thing in the parentheses. We talked about order of operations. What are some other laws? Might there be other laws?
Well, if you're going to solve that all the way for n, the idea that you have to add equal things to either side of an equation to maintain balance, or subtract. You have to divide both sides or multiply both sides by something to maintain balance. Those two laws.
What's that law?
Addition property of equality and the multiplication property of equality.
So it's the properties the properties of equality. So you have, because this always has, one side has to always be equal to the other. Anything else that you might use to solve this problem? Any other laws? Is it a lot like inverse operations, like at the end when you, is that a law or is that a?
Like when you're dividing by a negative number?
Yeah,
Like that's a fraction,
That's, you think of inequalities where if you divide both sides in an inequality by something, you'll switch the direction of the inequality.
Yeah.
That's an equation here, so not play.
Okay.
But fractions too, like if you're
For
dividing by a
fractions.
fraction, you actually multiply the
Oh,
inverse.
that,
That would be another one.
that's not an issue in this case, yeah. to get
Well, I was
right.
thinking here. So when we,
Oh, if you're wanting to move one thing to the side, that's
What would you
more,
call that?
just mathematical logic.
okay,
It's just logic. If 2 times something is 44,
right.
well then, I want just the something. Well, it must be half of that.
Okay.
Since I know what 2 times it is.
Okay, good. So then so I would have students that they just would, but then they would miss something. Usually it had to do with they misrepresented an integer, or they did the order of operations incorrectly, and so we would go back to that. But eventually, just by asking questions and going through every single thing about this equation, we would be able to have a conversation and figure it out. All the students would get there in the end. Now, you may not do this with every single problem. And, as a homeschooling mom, I did this with some problems, but I was able to assess a lot one-on-one. But of course, I couldn't do this over and over and over. I mean, it takes a long time. So usually we would go back the ones that they did wrong. This is something in assessment and just learning what your students know. You can find out what they know and don't know just by one or two things. And might be a good way for you to, if you're coming into class, they could do a problem and then you'd be able to assess if they have to talk it out, write it out. But it's worth your time, is what I'm saying. It is worth the time to be able to do that. But you wouldn't be able to go through all the practice problems to do that. So what did we learn about our student? What did we learn about ourselves in this whole process? What did we learn about the 5 common topics? And again, you can have this about everything: science, math, literature, grammar.
I'm thinking about this integration, like for art.
Yes. This is a great tool for art.
It's so great because it models how to get them to think deeper about topics, and it's not just memorization. It's not, like you said, just showing them how to do the math problem. It's diving deeper, and that's what we want for our students.
Right.
We want to give them the ability of how to think through things,
Right.
and not just memorize, and
Right.
not just look at something and move on. And like in an age where we're like, scrolling and screens and everything, it's like really investing the time so it doesn't get logged to their short-term memory versus their long-term memory. Like, I think like you said, it takes a while, but it's like investing a longer period of time about how to think through something. That's awesome.
Yeah, it really helps one slow down and to be able to perceive and attend, which is what we want to do in our lives as teachers. We have the tendency, or at least I do, to hurry up, get through this, teach this, do the problem. But if we slow down and attend to what we're doing and ask the questions, then I think the material will go. It will start to be embodied by them at a much deeper level. So you can do this with second grade math, phonics, using these tools, just asking the questions.
I just felt like going back to I'm a word person too, so going back to the poem, just looking at these different points lets you see the whole picture in a very well-rounded way.
Yeah, we covered all the bases. It really just helps you cover all the bases as a teacher, all the different things you could possibly talk about. I think that's usually an issue. Sometimes we're like, what are we going to say? What are we going to talk about? How do I keep the conversation going? So you guys did a great job keeping the conversation going with the poem. I didn't have to try, but if I needed to, I can pull out those topics. So anyway, thank you so much. I have a little bookmark for you if you would like. I will send it home. If you'd like.